Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Tuesday, September 8th, 2020. Time for another show. Time to catch up on all the things that are happening here and around the world and around the block. I guess we could take a look outside and see what's going on. There's voting going on today. It's not even early voting yet for the presidential race. It's late voting for, I guess, everything else. I just happened to have seen a tweet go by that says there's voting today going on in New Hampshire and Rhode Island. So I guess it's small state voting going on, and I guess everyone can walk to the one polling place that they have and cast their ballots. New Hampshire, I guess that's basically a meeting of the state legislature. Everybody is told they need to go vote today. I'm fascinated by these late. I guess, are these primaries? What's going on? I don't even know. I don't follow this stuff. Who votes this late? I guess, it works, right? It's not nearly November yet, and like if you have 10, 15 people in the state, I suppose you don't need that much time to count those ballots or conduct those campaigns, but it seems a little late to me, but it says something that they're both small New England states, and I guess they're handling it just fine up there. So, all right, well, congratulations. Welcome to the fold, New Hampshire and Rhode Island. Is that it? Are we finally done? Are there any smaller states than that? All right. Well, anyway, I think we're all done with the primary voting at long last. It hasn't held up anybody else as far as I can tell. New Hampshire and Rhode Island, I guess, just have their own things going on. Maybe they were a little busy. Maybe it was delayed during coronavirus outbreak. I have no idea. That's still ongoing, of course. Getting worse by the minute everywhere else, although not so much necessarily in Rhode Island and New Hampshire these days. It's transferred elsewhere. I saw an interesting study that I stuck away in pocket, but I think is going to take some dissection. Also conducted by economists as opposed to epidemiologists, so I'm not sure exactly what to make of it, but this is the takeaway. The Sturgis motorcycle rally was a terrible idea and is going to sicken and kill a lot of people and cost us a lot of money. And the economists there, I guess we can trust the economists. I don't know what the methodology was, but they were pinning the ultimate healthcare costs of the number of people infected as a result of this rally at someone else commenting on this report being distributed via Twitter pegged it at about the cost of a hurricane, a Category 4 hurricane hitting the coast and destroying buildings. Like $12 billion ultimately downstream this thing could cost us. And if you're wondering about how it could possibly cost so much money from a motorcycle rally, they do point out that they are talking about 350,000 participants, attendees at this Sturgis motorcycle rally in a town that's normally population 7,000. So, every building, basically, every structure, probably within 25 miles in any direction, was occupied by someone from out of state and who was engaged in relatively risky behavior, including going about in large crowds unmasked for days and weeks at a time. So they're pegging something like 250,000 of the cases reported nationally between August 2nd, when the rally began, and September 2nd as having their provenance in the Sturgis rally. And so remember, that can also mean someone who attends the rally, who picks up the virus, who gives it to a restaurant worker, either in Sturgis or on their way home from Sturgis in the next state over, who then goes home and gives it to their family, who then brings it with them to school and gives it to other students, who then brings it back to their family and then gives it to the dentist, et cetera, how these things go. And, I don't know. I'm not certain how to evaluate the numbers that they hung on the thing, but I think it seems clear that South Dakota is going to screw us all. Apparently, they also just decided to go ahead with and then just concluded holding their state fair as though nothing else had happened. And that's why when I guess put out the nightly reports analyzing the data from over at Worldometers, we find the Dakotas, those lightly populated Dakotas, and their neighbor states, some not so lightly populated, are at the top of the list in terms of new cases and new cases per million in population. And they've set the middle of the country on fire, as I mentioned the other day, from border to border, from North Dakota straight down to Texas. Every one of those states is in peril and not at or near the top of the list. Same on either side of the Mississippi River Valley, from the headwaters in Minnesota all the way down to Mississippi and Louisiana. So, that's what we would call a good situation, where things are totally under control. Things are being contained. Do you not think it's being contained? Asked, what's her name, who is supposed to be gone from the scene at this point, taking care of family business. All right, well, never mind. We didn't really mean to spend any time on her necessarily. But please, wear your mask, wash your hands, stay home when possible. Don't go to gigantic super spreader events, if at all possible. We'll just ask you that, if you would, please. All right, well, time for us to get rolling. Bill in Portland, Maine, where they're not voting. It's the one part of tiny New England that they're not voting today, apparently. Says, Daily Kos Radio is live now. Kagro X, me, David Waldman, reminds you that President Trump reminds you, this is a lot of reminding going on, that setting your neighborhood on fire to reveal the gender of your baby is patriotic. True. Don't let the libs take your freedoms. Yes, absolutely the case. I think we mention it yesterday that large parts of the country once again on fire because of pyrotechnics at a gender reveal party, which a lot of people delighted in pointing out. This is not the first time that a gender reveal party has lit large portions of the country on fire. And I think even the prior example that they pointed to also was not the first. Gender reveal parties have become a gigantic problem somehow around the country, even when they're not lighting large parts of the countryside on fire. The pyrotechnics have caused a number of problems. Everything from, blowing up guests accidentally to, blowing up or sending shock waves across the lawn that have knocked over cakes and been caught on camera. It's a real scene, and I really I don't know what's driving it either. I although I did see some interesting theorizing. I think Amanda Marcotte, who I definitely buy into the theory, and not just because it's her theory, but it's certainly in her wheelhouse. I think it was her. I mean, it fits so beautifully into her general view of things that it's almost assuredly her thinking. Although now I don't have the tweet at hand, but just basically talking about how I guess it became a thing, you're having a baby shower or something like that to celebrate, the upcoming birth. And, that's a decidedly, they take on very often a decidedly female slant. Well, it's a party for women who are about to give birth, and very often heavily attended by her friends who have done the same or are about to in the next couple of years. And it's understandable. But I guess apparently the theory is that the men who then have to attend, either because it's your baby, maybe you should take some interest in it, or get brought along by other attendees or whatever it is, I guess they feel like they have their masculinity threatened in some way because they're not into the baby shower thing, and so they have to masculinize the proceedings by, we'll make it a gender reveal party, because I've been reading all over the place that one of the ways that people reveal the gender is to explode something that they fill with either pink or blue powder of some kind, so that the giant explosion reveals in the cloud what the baby's gender is. Now, there's other ways of doing gender reveal parties. They're not explosion parties exclusively, but the gentler ways, I guess, are, I don't know what people, I guess, consider them too wimpy. Releasing butterflies or doves. I don't know if they color them at all, or maybe it's coded. If it's the dove, it's a boy, and if it's a butterfly, it's a girl. I don't know. But there's that. There's just telling people. That's another thing. There's other clever visual cues you can use. But just generally speaking, if you're interested in the gender of the baby, I could just tell you it doesn't require blowing anything up, but men demand that it include an explosion. And the most favorite way of including an explosion in a gender reveal party that likewise results in enough damage to make the local newspaper so that we all hear about it, because otherwise, generally speaking, I would guess thousands upon thousands of gender reveal parties go unremarked upon in the local news, because it's just a matter of, we tell you, or we hand out cigars with little bands on them that say it's a boy, it's a girl, the old traditional way, or some other visual representation. No explosion required at all. Those don't make the paper. Very boring. And really, honestly, who remembers them? Honestly, it's as though the child is never even born. Really, think about it. When was the last time you remember anybody being born who you had been told about their gender before their birth? And it probably never happened, right? You never. All right. Well, it's probably happened a lot. But the explosion ones make the papers. But the explosions, very often, as though it wasn't enough, it's not enough of a concession to the man to say, you can blow up a box to reveal the gender. Does it matter how I blow it up? And very few people are opting for, plastic explosive, let's say, and electric detonators. I mean, it's good that they're not, because that's even more dangerous. The way they're doing it is, I guess, and it comes prepackaged now. You can buy it right off the shelf. Packaged containers with the correct, gender-linked colored powder mixed in with one of our favorite substances from the gun fail days, tannerite. And so not only do you have an explosion, but the idea is that the explosion is to be triggered by our manly man shooting the box. So that's the whole thing. Like, we're going to have a baby, everyone. Terrific. Is your, are you thinking about revealing the gender? Why, yes, today, as a matter of fact. You're invited to the party. And how will you tell us? In preparation for welcoming this gentle, fragile creature into our lives, the father of the baby is going to shoot something representative of the baby and blow it up. And that's how you will all find out what gender the baby is. Now, what happens if the father misses a couple of shots? I don't know. It depends what the backstop is. If it's the family members, it's just that much more trouble. But that's what they're doing. This is how they're spending their time. And I guess that's supposed to make it acceptable to force the attendance of a manly man at a gender reveal party. So isn't that fantastic? I think we have real problems in this country. But I'm sure it happens everywhere, right? All those other countries in the world where people are just carrying firearms around and blowing stuff up because they're having a baby and they want everybody to know what the gender is. And I wonder whether it's caused an increase in parents insisting on knowing the gender, because they, I think, still traditionally will ask you at the doctor's office, when they do the ultrasound and the doctors come to know the gender of the baby. They will keep it secret from you if you prefer the sort of traditional let's find out on the day that the baby's born method. But I wonder whether more people are now asking, or I guess originally they were more asking because they thought, for practicality's sake, we want to be able to get ready with properly gendered, and maybe that's even an archaic term at this point, properly gendered, clothing and furniture and decorations for people who are worried about such things, or who don't like buying color neutral or gender neutral colors, or can't convince themselves that a blue thing doesn't necessarily mean that it's a boy, whatever. Now, I guess more people demanding to know so that they can then demand a gender reveal party. And I'd be curious to know whether more men are asking for gender reveal parties because they think it means a chance to blow something up. All right. That's probably pretty relevant to the politics of the country today somehow. It's a one-off from that. I guess really, as I'm describing it and thinking this really has nothing to do with anything, I think back to the opener of the show. Why aren't we doing anything serious about containing the coronavirus? And the answer is I was shopping online for things to blow up for the babies. I'm not irresponsible father. I'm thinking about you. All right, well, let's see. I also happened to see a news story go by with another thing on fire, and I said, what's this? And it's the Hills report that Japan's Olympics minister is saying, I think we have to go ahead with the Olympic Games, which doesn't sound like a ringing endorsement usually. Like normally, yeah, you want to go ahead with the Olympic Games. But of course, there's a coronavirus pandemic. They were already rescheduled, but basically, I guess the question is whether or not it would be safe in 2021 to hold the delayed 2020 Olympics, and that's still an open question. But I guess they basically have concluded both all of the investment made in construction, preparing for them, and all of the work that athletes have done rescheduling their preparation for the Olympic Games means that they just can't wait anymore. And they're basically saying, yeah, with or without COVID, they're going to go ahead with these things. What'll be interesting is to see whether the United States is invited to participate or not. I also saw the other day that Trump's tactics of bluster and threatening the rest of the world might come back to haunt us. I don't know if I put this story aside or not, but I will find it somewhere quickly just so that you have a link for it. But apparently, well, I definitely read the story because it's showing up in my Google search as purple. Whether it made it to Pocket or not, I'll find out later. U.S. could be thrown out of the Olympics. Why? Over Trump funding threats. The World Anti-Doping Agency warns. I never really considered this as a possibility, but that would really be something. That great capper for the election season if people pay attention to it, which they won't because the Olympics don't happen until much later. But here, a September 4th article in the Daily Beast by Jamie Ross reporting that American athletes could be banned from the Olympics if the Trump administration follows through on its threats to pull U.S. funding from the World Anti-Doping Agency, the group's leader has warned. Apparently, Trump's favorite tactic of threatening to withhold funding from international organizations around which, countries around the world cooperate on some important project or thing will potentially backfire, I guess. I mean, it's always going to potentially backfire. Like, for instance, defunding the World Health Organization during a pandemic. Probably going to backfire on us. But I didn't even see this one coming. And there's no real reason for it, and no one knows what the complaint is. I mean, we know what it is. It just doesn't make any sense. Earlier this year, a report by the White House's Office of National Drug Control Policy suggested that the U.S. withhold its World Anti-Doping Agency, or WADA, W-A-D-A, funding to strong-arm the agency. Into what? Into giving the U.S. more representation on its boards and committees. Really, I mean, that's a very American-centric thing to do, and so Trump could, I think, very easily be talked into it without ever stopping and asking, well, why do we need more representation on it? I mean, we're all against doping, yeah? I mean, I guess we're not, but we're supposed to say we are. And, there's athletes from all over the world involved in this, and it's one of those places where a magnanimous person as president, which we don't have now, and one who has an understanding of, how to cooperate among the countries of the world might step back and say, not that we want to necessarily reduce the American role, but it doesn't have to be an outsized role. Yeah, we probably send more athletes to the Olympics, certainly than most countries. And I guess of the athletes participating in the events, I would guess that the vast majority of, at least, of track and field athletes and such are not only either American, but train in the United States. I mean, lots and lots of the athletes who participate on behalf of other countries, represent other countries, train in, go to college in, what have you, live in full-time in the United States, retaining citizenship elsewhere or having dual citizenship or just being permitted by the Olympic committees of those countries because of ancestry, heritage, what have you, to represent them. I don't know, though, whether anybody has felt like American or American-trained athletes were getting a raw deal in any way. Don't participate in the activity defined as doping, and I guess you're good. I'm sure there's nuance in politics to everything. So in steps Trump to ruin that. We're going to strong-arm the WADA into giving the U.S. more representation on its boards and committees, which for Trump, I gather, is really about he's got friends who want to sit on those boards and committees, probably because it means free tickets to the Olympics and the rich people's suites where they can eat shrimp for free while they watch. And they weren't getting them, and so they demanded that we strong-arm them into giving us more of them. That's my guess. The WADA president, Witold Banka. I love the names involved in Olympic movement stuff because they're from around the world. It's terrific. Anyway, Witold Banka told Reuters, who's not an international member of the Olympic Committee, it's the press agency, Reuters, that the consequences of such a funding withdrawal could be, quote, severe and far-reaching for American athletes. I mean, I don't think it's going to do any damage to the World Anti-Doping agency. They'll lose out on some money. I think they can make up for it later. And also, I suppose a cut in funding for them would probably be met by saying, well, if you cut out the largest number of athletes provided by or trained by the United States and just say, well, they're not covered by WADA anymore and they're not allowed in the Olympics. We don't have to test them. We don't have to monitor them. We don't have to worry about them. Then their smaller budget will be more than adequate. But anyway, he never did the economic calculation, as you can imagine. And so, guess what? It could be severe and far-reaching for American athletes. And they added that we told Banka, is considering making non-payment of a contribution a contravention of the World Anti-Doping Code, which would mean, I guess, International Olympic Committee rules state that countries must be compliant with that code or risk being frozen out of the games. Inevitably, this could have serious repercussions for athletes from that country, including their participation in major international sporting events, Banka said. And that sounds pretty, I don't know. Well, it sounds scary if you're an American Olympic athlete. I am not. But still time to get involved in the curling team, probably. But if that ever happens, I'll let you know. But leave it to Trump to possibly also have the United States kicked out of the Olympics, making America great and respected around the world once again. Thanks a lot, you stupid idiot. All right, well, I didn't know that we were going to be going in that direction, but fire brought me there. So I guess that was worth doing. I had a better idea about our interest in discussing some other subjects. Let's throw them out in reverse chronological order because that's the easiest thing to do. How about this? We'll give you a sampling from around the world before diving into some of the deeper stuff. An opinion piece. Does everybody like opinions? I've got one. You probably do too. There's an opinion piece over at CNN now being covered up aggressively by pop-up ads. You'll be glad to know today's mortgage rate at LendingTree, a mere 2.42%. So jump in if you're looking at... All right, anyway. Trump, this opinion piece says, is parroting the Kremlin line on the Navalny poisoning. Not a surprise, but just to keep up with current events and let you know that thing that you expected him to do with regard to the Navalny poisoning, he, in the opinion of Samantha Vinograd, actually is doing. Who is Samantha Vinograd? She is a CNN national security analyst, but by way of full disclosure, she's also a senior advisor at the University of Delaware's Biden Institute, which of course makes her instantly suspect to those on the right, but it is not affiliated with the Biden campaign. As you might imagine, they probably followed all the rules about that. And I don't know. I mean, Biden's not a rich person. I don't think he endowed this Biden Institute. I think it was named for him in honor of his long public service. So, yeah, no connection with the Biden campaign. If it were a Trump Institute at the University of Delaware, they would likely say the same thing, but you would be compelled to doubt that there was no affiliation with the Trump campaign. Anyway, Vinograd also suspect to those on the right, I'm sure, by having served in Obama's National Security Council and at the Treasury Department under George W. Bush, because he's not a real conservative. You know, you get the idea. Here's the opinion, finally. Let's call a lie a lie. That's a great idea. It gets tiresome under President Donald Trump as his inaccurate statements pile up, but it's important that Americans are made aware that the president continues to lie about almost everything. It's a great start so far. Each new falsehood is unsurprising based on his track record with the truth, but that doesn't make it any less dangerous. They pose risks to our democracy, including the security of our election in November. Now, during a White House press briefing on Friday, in response to a question about the poisoning of Russian opposition politician Alexei Navalny, President Trump said that the U.S. has no proof yet about what had happened. Navalny, an anti-corruption activist and outspoken critic of Vladimir Putin, collapsed on a flight to Moscow on August 20th and was taken to Berlin for treatment 2 days later after being diverted, I think, to like Siberia or something like that. The German government said last Wednesday that Navalny was poisoned with a nerve agent from the Novichok group, a Soviet-era chemical weapon. The same agent was used in a March 2018 attack on former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia in the English city of Salisbury. A senior German security official told the New York Times that military scientists there were 100% certain that it was Novichok. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Want to hear some more about what's going on with Alexei Navalny and Trump's parroting of the Putin line on this? You're going to, so get ready for it. The Germans, who love David Hasselhoff, when they're not busy with that, they apparently ran some tests and came back with this. Yeah, it's Novichok. How certain are you? 100% certain. So as obviously Trump's right. He says there's no proof that he was poisoned, period. Not just what kind of poison it was, but no proof at all that he was actually poisoned. Well, we're 100% certain that he was, and that this was the poison, and that is a Russian MO. And we've seen it before. Right, no proof. Well, there's plenty of evidence, but in Trump's mind, no proof yet. However, during that Friday briefing, 2 days after the German announcement, Trump answered a question about Navalny's poisoning with a rambling response, like our opening segment, mentioning China, North Korea, and Afghanistan, somehow, before turning to Navalny and saying, "We haven't had any proof yet, but I will take a look," which, of course, take a look is one of his tells. I don't know. If you look at it, because I'm not going to look at it because I don't know what I'm looking for or what I'm seeing when it's shown to me. If you take a look, you'll find out the opposite of what I'm saying, is the usual meaning of that statement. Those statements sound like the U.S. president is serving as a surrogate for the Kremlin. The Russian government is saying there's no proof and they need more information from Germany. Trump's statements are simply not credible. German officials briefed the EU as well as NATO members. We're one of those, including the U.S. This led to a series of supporting statements from U.S. allies, including the EU, which said that the toxicological analysis carried out by a specialized laboratory of the German armed forces, that's one word in German if you read it right, that's amazing, proves, there you go, there's that proof, proves that Mr. Navalny was poisoned by a military-grade chemical nerve agent of the Novichok group. Sounds like a consulting firm or a polling outfit. I'm going to start that one. Probably not going to be real popular. This, of course, developed in the Soviet Union and later in Russia. NATO also condemned in the strongest possible terms, so don't look for anything stronger, condemned the attack, quote, with the use of a nerve agent from the banned Novichok group. That, I guess, is that the strongest possible terms? Because I'm not exactly shaken by that, but all right. U.S. officials issued similar statements, not the president, but other people. U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Stephen Biegun, I don't know, Biegun, Biegun, anyway. He said that he found the German assessment very credible, throwing cold water on Trump's claim that the Germans haven't shared information. That's, I don't know what it is basically what his claim is, and that we need more proof. Trump's own National Security Council issued a statement on Twitter which clearly said Novichok was used, flagged that the Russians used Novichok in the past, and vowed to, quote, work with allies and the international community to hold those in Russia accountable wherever the evidence leads and restrict funds for their malign activities, which they are not going to do, I guess, until there's a new president. And Joe Biden will probably take care of that. I don't think there's any real doubt but that those sanctions would be forthcoming. Whether they're effective or not, you know, the Kremlin is the Kremlin. That we can't tell, but at least there would be a response. I have worked on NSC statements in this regard, says our author. They are based on the declassification of intelligence and authorized release of sensitive information. U.S. officials and our allies undoubtedly integrated available evidence and intelligence into these public statements. While the U.S. and our allies made statements based on reliable information, Russia played their favorite game, denial. They said they weren't briefed on the German information, even though German officials say they briefed the Russian ambassador. This tracks with Moscow's denials about using Novichok at all against Sergei Skripal in 2018. The United States imposed sanctions on Russia after the Skripal poisoning, kicking out 60 Russian diplomats and ordering the closure of a Russian diplomatic property in the U.S. as additional punitive measures. The U.S. also imposed sanctions on Russian GRU officers allegedly involved in the Skripal attack. Yet despite overwhelming evidence, Russia still refuses to acknowledge their role in that poisoning, and they're singing the same tune today when it comes to the Navalny attack. Yet Trump is dangerously echoing Russian propaganda instead of standing with his own team. The statements that he hadn't seen proof do not track with what his own officials are saying, not to mention the statements by U.S. allies. With his inaccurate statements, Trump is undercutting his own national security team. That diminishes the chance they'll be taken seriously on any issues, as it's clear they don't speak on behalf of the president. Plus, he's once again distancing himself from U.S. allies. But that a good point, the first one, just in terms of America's role in anything happening anywhere in the world. When the serious people at the national security team are no longer regarded as speaking for the president, when they speak out and say things like, we're going to hold people accountable for this, everybody says they're not going to because Trump isn't going to let him. That's damaging for the U.S. reputation everywhere. Just another, example of the destruction he's wreaking on the country here. Plus, like I said, once again distancing himself from U.S. allies. Alliances are already under strain thanks to Trump's constant criticism of NATO, which he reportedly has considered withdrawing from altogether. That's a slow developing play, though. It's in Trump's hands, and he can't pull the trigger. Not to mention that he and German Chancellor Angela Merkel have had a strained relationship. Withdrawal from NATO, I would guess, by the way, just offhand thought that occurred to me. That's the sort of thing that I would expect Trump to finally try to pull the trigger on in a lame duck period. If he were to lose the election Even if he were to accept the results and plan to leave office, that would be one of the sort of things that I could see him trying to do to make life difficult for everybody after he was gone, and leaving it up to Biden to obsess over the details of repairing that relationship rather than focusing on other things that we may need domestically. My hope is that if he were to do such a thing, that we would have a longer grace period from our allies who would say, we trust that everything will be repaired in time. You don't necessarily have to trip over yourself smoothing over relationships with us. We're your friends. We knew this was an anomaly. Anyway, more broadly, Trump's refusal to condemn a Russian chemical weapon attack on an opposition figure signals that Russia can get a free pass on just about anything, and Putin won't hear a peep from the president. That puts everyone on the Kremlin's perceived enemies list at risk. Putin feels emboldened to tick through his macabre to-do list of threats to eliminate. Trump's refusal to condemn the Kremlin extends to Russian attacks on our elections, but when it comes to the Russian election threats, Trump's not just ignoring the threat, he's actively helping it. The intelligence community, of course, well, you know the background of that story. While spreading domestic disinformation, Trump officials are also seemingly censoring intelligence. ABC News reported that DHS recently held off sending a memo to law enforcement agencies that called out unsubstantiated Russian attacks on Biden's mental health. Trump and his campaign, of course, attack Biden's health, mental or otherwise, all the time. The memo wasn't up, they said. DHS said the memo wasn't up to agency standards, but when coupled with the fact that the DNI has largely canceled oral briefings to Congress on election security, it appears the administration is censoring intelligence that it finds politically inconvenient. At the same time, just to conclude here, the administration is misrepresenting intelligence to support its own ends. Attorney General William Barr and National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien continue to disproportionately focus on the threats from China, contending that it is the biggest threat to our elections. Last month, the intelligence community said Russia is actively engaged in a range of covert measures targeting U.S. elections. In contrast, the IC cited largely overt measures from China, though they continue to weigh more aggressive action. These two examples aren't even in the same ballpark. We need accurate information to protect ourselves during this election. Misrepresenting threat levels and censoring certain intelligence may help the Trump campaign, but it hurts democracy, if anybody cares about that. Trump's been doing PR for Putin for a long time, and his actions pose a distinct threat to our national security. Was there anything, just looking back, in the part that we skipped? I think we knew all of that bit that we skipped there, so I don't think I've done you any disservice. Good. Okay. So that brings us up to speed on Trump as Putin agent. So that's squared away. Here's some domestic political machinations in the background. We heard mention from Greg the other day that the Trump campaign was running low on funds, and probably should spend some time reading the article in the New York Times explaining exactly why. Maybe that we're better off doing that before jumping into this Politico piece about whether or not he's going to be able to pull his bacon out of the fire with help from other billionaires or even from himself. Probably one of the least convincing solutions floated so far is that Trump himself will come through and self-fund a large portion of his campaign. But he has just spent several years stealing all that money. And I don't think he has any interest in burning it at this point, even though he might consider it an investment in the ability to steal more. I don't know if he trusts himself at that level. So we'll see. I doubt it, though. Basically, the calculation is, will Trump willingly part with money that he has just stolen, and he's very proud of himself for having stolen? And the answer is probably just flat no there. All right, let's see. About him being broke. Let's see. Was this the one that we were thinking of yesterday? I feel like there was more than one. And I guess it's illustrated with the same picture. Have they, I'm curious about whether they retitled the same piece in between my saving it and I got fooled and saved it twice, or are they two separate pieces? No, they're two separate pieces. They're just similarly titled. Okay, so the one I had on hand yesterday and didn't read was from Eric Lipton. This was from the 5th, was Saturday, right? How Trump draws on campaign funds to pay legal bills. That was the long story short version of it we did at the very end of the show, and maybe you read up on things. Maybe you had already read up on it when I discussed it or mentioned it. But now I feel like we got to spend some time on this to get the specifics. As he has done with other aspects of the presidency, Donald J. Trump has redefined the practice in ways that have unsettled even some Republicans. Remember, again, New York Times. So they're doing everything they can, for whatever reason, I really don't know what the motivation is, to normalize what's going on or to minimize the unusual nature of what's happening. It's very unusual. Eric Lipton reports it this way. President Trump was proudly litigious before his victory in 2016 and has remained so in the White House, but one big factor has changed. He has drawn on campaign donations as a piggy bank for his legal expenses to a degree far greater than any of his predecessors. It is certainly the case, I'll comment this way, that others, Republican and Democrat, politicians very frequently find themselves leaning on campaign funds to pay legal bills when legal bills arise. But it is, generally speaking, an infrequent occurrence when major legal bills arise in terms of defending the candidate or the campaign against charges of, large-scale illegality, or that they are aggressively litigious with others. That's just not really a thing that happens most often with campaigns. They're reluctant litigants and are seeking to avoid litigation wherever possible. And the very opposite here for Trump. But his litigious habits only doubled when he realized, well, what if I could threaten everybody with lawsuits and make somebody else pay for the lawsuits? And as you might predict, if you were, let's say, a behavioral economist, you might predict that that would increase the amount of litigation he involved himself in and therefore the expenses involved in it. And you would be right. In New York, Lipton continues, Mr. Trump dispatched a team of lawyers to seek damages of more than $1 million from a former campaign worker after she claimed she had been the target of sexual discrimination and harassment by another aide. That'd be a small bore side story to this administration, certainly, if he did nothing about it or even just paid. But no, he seeks damages of $1 million from her. The lawyers have been paid $1.5 million by the Trump campaign for work on the case and others related to the president. Remember, a case like this is generally calculated, even if it's not true. Seeking $1 million in damages, knowing that the defendant here will have to pay $1.5 million just to defend against the case and then may yet lose and double their expenses, is calculated to drive a settlement. But you know how Trump feels about settlements. Also, you know how he does it running casinos. So I guess you can predict the outcome here. In Washington, Trump and his campaign affiliates hired lawyers to assist members of his staff and family, including a one-time bodyguard, his oldest son, Trump's oldest son, not the bodyguard's oldest son, and his son-in-law, or maybe, I don't know, actually, now that I think about it, who can even tell? I mean, it could be the bodyguard's oldest son and son-in-law, but I don't think so. Anyway, paying their legal bills, basically, as they were pulled into investigations related to Russia and Ukraine. The Republican National Committee has paid at least $2.5 million in legal bills to the firms that did this and other legal work. That, of course, probably would have been the bodyguard. I can't remember his name, but maybe you do. And then Don Jr. and Jared Kushner. In California, Trump sued to block a law that would have forced him to release his taxes if he wanted to run for re-election, or I guess be on the ballot in California. The Trump campaign and the Republican National Committee have paid a law firm handling that case, among others, $1.8 million. Mr. Trump's tendency to turn to the courts and the legal issues that have stemmed from norm-breaking characteristics of his presidency helps explain how he and his affiliated political entities have spent at least $58.4 million in donations on legal and compliance work since 2015, according to a tally by the New York Times and the nonpartisan Campaign Finance Institute. By comparison, Obama and the DNC spent $10.7 million, still a significant sum, but some 5 times less. Well, let's say 4 to be safe, on legal and compliance expenses during the equivalent period starting in 2007. George W. Bush spent much less, even taking into account his legal spending on the recount fight that went to the Supreme Court, records show. Remember that? The spending on behalf of Trump covers not only legal work that would be relatively routine for any president or candidate, and some of the costs related to the Russia inquiry and his impeachment, but also cases in which he has a personal stake, including attempts to enforce non-disclosure agreements and protect his business interests, which, in other words, would have no business being billed to others at all. Certainly not the RNC, but whatever, he controls it. And he draws no distinctions between funds that he can control and funds that are really his. Anything he controls is his. Anything he doesn't control, he'll pretend to control. So, he's likely to do this. But right, like they said, even if you added in impeachment, which is highly unusual and I assume highly expensive, that still doesn't explain all of the spending that's going on. You have to look at just how crazy he is about spending other people's money on litigation. Many of the bills being paid by donors to Mr. Trump and his party have come from the Republican National Committee's recount account. It's a special fund created after 2014 when Congress, at the request of campaign finance lawyers and leaders of both parties, allowed much larger contributions by individuals to the political parties, totaling $106,500 per person, compared with the normal $2,800 limit. In other words, if you earmark additional donations for recount funds, they can accept them and park that money there in case of emergency. It's impossible to know, based on Federal Election Commission filings, how much of the $58.4 million in total legal bills went to routine legal work, as opposed to extraordinary stuff. Payments from the political committees to lawyers and law firms are not itemized by case, so the filings don't break down how much donor money went to pay for specific legal actions. A spokesman for the Trump family would not say how much Mr. Trump had paid out of his own pocket or his company's pocket in legal fights, including Trump's attempt to block access to his personal financial records. It's also hard to differentiate between legal clashes the president has initiated and those in which he is the target of opponents, at least in the FEC filings, you see. And a growing portion of the overall legal spending has come recently as his campaign has stepped up its efforts to battle Democratic actions to make voting easier. But an examination of spending by his various campaign arms documents how the intermingling of his presidency, business interests, campaigns, defense against the Russian investigation, and impeachment, and eagerness to penalize rivals have led to millions of dollars in donor money going to help bankroll litigation. That's the bottom line. Drawing on donations to pay many legal expenses is permitted by campaign finance law, but as he has done with other aspects of the presidency, Trump has redefined the practice in ways that have unsettled even some Republicans. Unsettled not so much because it pushes the line legally, but because it drains the coffers. That's what they're really interested in. Anyway, they point in particular to examples like his efforts to enforce non-disclosure agreements with former staff members. Vindicating President Trump's personal interests is now so intertwined with the interests of the Republican Party, they are one and the same. And that includes the legal fights the party is paying for now, said Matthew T. Sanderson, who has served as a campaign finance lawyer to presidential candidates including Rand Paul, dummy, Rick Perry, and John McCain. American hero. Just thought I'd throw that in. And plus a snappy dancer in the middle there, Rick Perry. A spokesman for Mr. Trump declined to comment, but a spokeswoman for the Republican National Committee said it was Democrats and other liberals who are driving this blitz of spending. I mean, it's your money, guys. Are you spending it? Then you're doing it. But they're making me do it. Well, then don't answer. Demur. Pay settlements. Something. The RNC is more than happy to cover the costs of defending the president from the Democrats' baseless litigation and partisan impeachment sham, said the spokeswoman, whose name is Mandy, with an I, Merritt. And a heart, I'm sure, over the I. The filings do not address the value of work for which he has not been charged, like Rudy Giuliani's unpaid position as his personal lawyer. I wouldn't pay for that. Nor do they account for the legal support Mr. Trump as president receives from the Justice Department, which has helped defend him on issues that blur the line between his public and private roles, like the constitutional prohibition on a president receiving benefits from other governments and efforts to obtain his tax returns and financial records. That first one is the emoluments portion of his legal problems, in case you didn't catch the reference. The advent of the special recount account for legal expenses has fueled an explosion of available cash for both political parties, but because the FEC has given little guidance over how money put into these accounts can be spent, the political parties have used them on a variety of seemingly unrelated purposes, including charter airplane flights. Records show you're probably not, contesting recounts that way. Perkins Coie, or I've never known how to pronounce that, Coie, famous law firm, a prominent firm, in fact, that handles Democratic candidates, has been paid $17 million just by the DNC in the last 4 years, benefiting as well from this new flow of large donations to the party. In Mr. Trump's case, the reliance on high-dollar donations had led to questions about whether contributors from casinos, Wall Street, coal, and other industries expect something in return. Republican donors who have sent large amounts of money since 2019 to this special RNC legal account include Joseph Kraft, chief executive of the coal mining company that's benefited from Mr. Trump's regulatory actions. One of them, anyway. They all really have. They also include Stephen Schwartzman, chief executive of the Blackstone Group, and Thomas J. Barrack Jr., both private equity investors who have long been close to the president and members of the Fertitta family of Las Vegas, who own a casino there. Barrack, of course, you remember, as chairman of the inaugural slush fund that all got stolen as well. Ms. Merritt, the Republican committee spokeswoman, rejected any suggestion that the donations were made to try to influence Mr. Trump. You can imagine the yargle-bargle she put behind that. We'll skip it. All presidents are enmeshed in litigation related to their official duties, and Mr. Trump's 2020 campaign and the RNC are fighting an array of topics related to the election, including litigation about mail-in ballots and voting rights. Now, that's one of their own making, of course. But for Trump, who has always preferred to use other people's money in his business ventures, the reliance on campaign funds as a legal kitty extends to issues that are of concern to him personally. The biggest payments have gone to Jones Day, the law firm which has received a total of $18.8 million from Trump's campaign, the RNC, and America First Action, the super PAC, all too closely affiliated with Mr. Trump. And as a matter of fact, it bills itself as the official super PAC of the campaign, which you would think is on its face an evidence of illegal coordination, but apparently we all just ignore it and go on, like we do with so many other things. Most of that spending, $11.5 million worth, came from Trump's campaign, reflecting the firm's heavy load of campaign-related work, as well as cases more personally tied to Trump. Among the 20 suits Jones Day has been involved in include one filed by demonstrators who claimed they were beaten at a Kentucky political rally, a filing in federal court claiming that Mr. Trump and his allies helped distribute information obtained by Russian hackers during the 2016 election, and one from a Missouri man who claimed he was arrested after he simply laughed while at a Trump rally. A spokesman for the firm declined to comment. Smaller amounts have gone to boutique law firms, such as that of Daniel K. Hagood. I don't know how he pronounces Hagood. He's a Texas lawyer whose website says he specializes in, quote, representing companies and individuals entangled in the criminal justice system. Why even include that, honestly, either on the website or in this report? Of course he does. Whatever. Anyway, he's been paid $254,331 this year by America First Action, the super PAC. Neither Mr. Hagood nor America First Action would answer questions about what the work he was doing, but I guess we can surmise that he was busy representing the campaign because it was entangled in the criminal justice system. I don't know what that's supposed to tell us. Campaign funds were also used to fight a lawsuit filed by an aide to Trump's presidential campaign in 2016 who claimed that Trump had inappropriately kissed her, with $196,229 paid to a Florida firm, Ford and Harrison. That's interesting. That's like, is that a Matrix glitch? Harrison Ford becomes Ford and Harrison. And to a Los Angeles-based lawyer, Charles J. Harder, who has been paid a total of $3.4 million. Mr. Trump prevailed in that case. I don't know what the case is, but it's linked if you want to check it out. It's one of the few cases in which he prevails, I guess. One major area of spending records show has been an attempt to enforce non-disclosure or non-disparagement agreements with former aides who have accused Mr. Trump or members of his staff of wrongdoing. Mr. Harder, frequently hired by Trump's campaign, is perhaps best known for his work on behalf of the professional wrestler Hulk Hogan in a lawsuit filed in 2012 against the website Gawker, which ended up causing its bankruptcy. We do remember that one. Another key lawyer in these efforts, Lawrence S. Rosen, who works out of Trump's 40 Wall Street office building in Manhattan. Remember briefly the tallest building or second tallest building in lower Manhattan after 9/11, anniversary of which is coming up. By the way, great reason no one here needs another reason to vote for Biden over Trump, but I just wanted to remind everybody, and maybe around September 11th, we ought to spread the word in the run up to it. If you don't want Donald Trump to be president during the upcoming 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks in 2021, you need to get rid of him. I mean, if you want to have any kind of dignified remembrance of the 20th anniversary, you just can't have him in office. He may babble about it from exile on Twitter, but it'll be a lot worse if he's actually at the events and expected to speak to the occasion. And you just don't want that to happen. Let that be your only motivation. It's fine. I don't mind if that's the case. All right, so where were we? Yes, he works out of 40 Wall Street, does Mr. Rosen, and has handled real estate legal disputes and other issues for Trump for decades. Bills from Rosen's firm to the Trump campaign total $1.5 million. Together, they have taken up more than a dozen cases for Trump, many of which have a particularly personal flavor. And I don't really even want to think about the personal flavor of Donald J. Trump. We'll be right back. Ugh. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. What were we doing? I can't remember. I've been distracted by by word via Twitter that from I don't know who, but tweeting around a story from the New York Post as is their headline, why poop tests may be a better way to detect COVID-19. And while I understand the science behind it, I'm not sure that a poop test is better than any other kind of test for any reason whatsoever. Quite honestly, even if it's a test of did you poop, I'd rather just take your word for it. And quite honestly, I didn't even want that. I just thought I'd put that out there. I had tweeted, better? I don't really know. I'm sure it's more effective. I don't know if I would call it better, although sticking a swab up people's nose is no party either. I did have a response from a person on Twitter who works under the handle Breakfast Queen 1, who says, testing sewage for polio tracking is frequently done in Pakistan. I think sewage testing is done in a lot of places for a lot of things, including I have read about their tracking COVID that way here in the United States. I don't know whether it's unique to Pakistan, the amount of poop testing that they're doing. But at any rate, I just wanted to let Breakfast Queen know. Headline here, Breakfast Queen ruins breakfast. So film at 11 a.m. because, really honestly, who wanted to talk about that? And the answer clearly is me. I just did it. I didn't have to. I went out of my way to do it. So I'll be talking to a psychiatrist about that later, I suppose. All right, back to the extensive reporting of Eric Lipton on just how all of the money disappeared with respect to its disappearing into the pockets of lawyers. It's important. I'm going to spend a lot of time on it. There are a lot of other stories, and I'm going to regret not having treated them, but this is one I wanted to get to because it's important, and it's going to affect the way the entire balance of the campaign goes, I think. And as a result, I mean, I just don't think that Trump is going to stand for, he's not going to stand up straight for it anyway. He's not going to stand for being left in the lurch on campaign spending to contest this election. He's, I think, going to throw everything he's got at it, by which I mean taking as much as he can from other people and throwing that at it. And in his desperation to get a hold of the money which doesn't belong to him, I believe he has yet to commit his greatest crimes, domestically speaking. And I think they are playing out now. And I guess triumph or tragedy, you tell me. If Trump is defeated and leaves office, a lot of that's going to go down the memory hole. And it's probably not right that it go down the memory hole, but it'll be real interesting to decide what, if anything, to prosecute when all of this is done. And if I'm right, probably his greatest domestic crimes yet to come and never to be addressed. Maybe not even investigated and covered in the press, which will have by that point taken on a greater interest in what the Biden administration is doing. If we're lucky, they'll be taking a close look at the hard work of repairing the damage to the country that Biden is undertaking. But if things are, if the past is any guide, it will be about Hillary Clinton's emails, or the rough equivalent in the Biden administration. So anyway, some bad news for you there. Mr. Rosen, when we left off, Rosen was, what's his name? Lawrence Rosen, the guy who works in 40 Wall Street. Remember that diversion? Rosen also represented the campaign in a lawsuit that involved a 2016 campaign aide. Which one? A.J. Delgado. She's not named here, but we all know who it is. This is, all they say is a campaign aide who became pregnant during an affair with her boss, Jason Miller. I think we all know where that leads. And Jason Miller, the wilding Jason Miller, who basically decided a long time ago, this is being involved at this level in the Trump campaign is total impunity for any crimes of any nature. I will simply do everything I can, everything I ever fantasized about getting away with, and you'll all watch and have to love it. And that's what's going on here. And then, so who gets rich from this? Rosen. Okay, so Rosen represented the campaign in Delgado's suit. It was dismissed, this suit, after Miller reportedly told her she could not be, oh, I see, not that the suit was dismissed. She was dismissed from service on the campaign. And wait till you get this. If you didn't think Miller was disgusting enough already. So, Rosen represents the campaign in a lawsuit from the aide who became pregnant during an affair with her boss, Jason Miller, and then was dismissed after Mr. Miller reportedly told her she could not be seen, quote, waddling around the White House pregnant, the lawsuit says. Wow. Mr. Harder also worked on lawsuits on behalf of Mr. Trump's campaign against news organizations that included the Washington Post, New York Times, and CNN, claiming they published false and defamatory statements about the president in opinion pieces. That's not going anywhere. Lawyers defending the former Trump aides said the use of campaign funds to bankroll Mr. Trump's legal efforts is part of a long-running strategy to intimidate and silence his critics. It is the weaponization of lawsuits that are frivolous, said John Phillips. Remember when Republicans were against frivolous lawsuits? Where were we? The weaponization of frivolous lawsuits. John Phillips says he's a Florida lawyer representing Ms. Manigault Newman. That'd be Omarosa Manigault Newman. They are intended to suppress First Amendment speech. No other president in his history of the United States has ever resorted to anything like this. They didn't introduce Omarosa and all this. She's in a photo which is captioned with her full name up above. But ordinarily they would say it in the body of the article as well. But okay, we all knew who it was. They are intended, continues this lawyer, to suppress First Amendment speech. No other president in the history of the U.S. has ever resorted to anything like this. Defending himself against lawsuits by individuals who claim they were assaulted at campaign events, has also consumed a significant chunk of campaign funds. I can't say that's never happened before, but certainly never at this scale. And I think it's fair to say never with the candidate shouting from the stage, "I'll pay your legal bills if you go beat that guy up." Well, those include long-running lawsuits filed by a Massachusetts peace activist, Rod Weber, who sued Mr. Trump's campaign after he claimed he was thrown headfirst into a table after he had tried to ask a question of Mr. Trump at a 2015 event in New Hampshire. The Trump campaign has paid $101,828 to a New Hampshire-based firm, Cleveland Water and Bass, that has been handling the case since last year. Is Bass Charlie Bass? Someone can look that up and let me know. Others include the lawsuit Mr. Trump and his campaign jointly filed in California last summer in a successful effort to overturn the state's requirement that he release his income tax return if he wanted to be on the presidential ballot in California. Okay, now on to the section about the Russia and impeachment cases. Anybody find an answer about Charlie Bass? I'd be curious about that. You all remember Charlie Bass, right? Wasn't he member of Congress from New Hampshire for a couple of years, not that long ago, so I wouldn't be surprised if that's where he landed and he's the Bass and all this, but New Hampshire's a small place. Next, Russia and the impeachment cases, or the Russia and impeachment cases, and they're illustrated by a picture of Jay Sekulow kind of barely staying contained in his suit jacket here, but we all have problems. The investigations of Mr. Trump by the special counsel and congressional Democrats have also generated large legal tabs that have been picked up in part by the president's political operation. That includes paying for lawyers to help represent members of his family who were targeted in lawsuits or were called to testify, including Don Jr. and Jared Kushner. Campaign donations have gone to pay legal bills for Hope Hicks. If you're already asking yourself, Hope Hicks, how does she do it? By which I mean pay her legal expenses. The answer is campaign donations stolen from MAGA folks who can ill afford to lose their donations now that their boats have sunken in the boat parades. Anyway, they went to pay bills for Hope Hicks. You know who she is. Keith Schiller, that's the former bodyguard. And Boris Epshteyn, I almost forgot about that guy, a former Sinclair Broadcast Group commentator who now serves as a Trump campaign advisor, and Corey Lewandowski, Trump's former campaign manager, one of like 80. The case of Michael Cohen, Mr. Trump's former personal lawyer, showed the limits of the president's willingness to foot legal bills. When Mr. Cohen was pulled into the investigation of Trump's ties to Russia, the Trump campaign covered a large share of his legal tab, but after federal investigators raided Mr. Cohen's office, questions began to emerge about whether Mr. Cohen might turn on the president. Most people will flip if the government lets them out of trouble, which they didn't, even if it means lying or making up stories, Mr. Trump said on Twitter on April 21st, 2018, 4 days after his campaign paid $48,342 to Mr. Cohen's lawyer, a small share of the remaining amount owed. Sorry, I don't see Michael doing that despite the horrible witch hunt and the dishonest media. But soon enough, Mr. Cohen did flip, but that's because Trump can't see anything. I can't see him doing it. Well, you can't see at all. So guess what? You missed it. Cohen did flip the campaign, then halted payments to his lawyer, which I guess is understandable. The impeachment effort produced substantial spending by Mr. Trump's political entities. Trump's campaign and the RNC, which has been raising and spending money in coordination with Trump, have helped pay for the legal bills from the firms of Jay Sekulow, Mark Kasowitz, Jane Raskin, and Alan Dershowitz. It is not known how much they charged or whether all the payments to them stem from their work on impeachment, but Trump-affiliated campaign entities have paid these lawyers and their firms $2 million since 2018, the FEC records show. There's no record of payments to Giuliani, obviously, the former New York mayor who has been providing legal services, he says, free of charge to Mr. Trump since 2018. I don't know if I really believe that, but they're not going to be on the FEC reports. In his financial disclosure report filed in July, Trump said the value of work done by Giuliani is unascertainable. And I guess if you squint at it just right, that's probably a straight statement of fact. They are unascertainable. I can ascertain no value to them whatsoever. Mr. Trump has sometimes used lawyers who have also have intervened with the federal government on behalf of other clients, including appeals made directly to him. Sekulow, for example, has run a nonprofit group that pressed the government to stop abortion funding and has also urged the Trump administration to exempt churches from certain federal policies such as hiring rules. Sekulow said the dual roles did not represent a conflict because his work for Mr. Trump was done through a separate law firm. So that's also a good way to save on your legal bills. I'll tell you what, instead of billing you $2 million, I will bill you $1 million if you then issue this executive order on abortion or change these rules about hiring practices for churches. You could see how that might work as a barter. Giuliani also has a collection of clients whose agenda he has pushed, including a Venezuelan businessman under criminal investigation in the United States, William S. Consovoy, a lawyer who has done extensive work for Trump, paid with campaign funds, including challenging the California law that tried to force Trump to release his tax returns, is also suing the Justice Department. Interesting. On behalf of corporate clients such as U-Haul International. Mr. Consovoy and Mr. Giuliani did not respond to requests for comment. The role of the Justice Department in litigation involving Mr. Trump has also drawn attention. I guess before we move on to that section, I guess the play there is, well, what if the Justice Department either stopped contesting the charges or conceded our point? I could lower your legal bills if that happened, which would, likely be an unethical and possibly illegal arrangement, and possibly an emolument, if you, depending on where the money comes from. Anyway, the department automatically represents the president. Oh, yes, the role of the Justice Department, I was going to say, in litigation involving Trump has also drawn attention. The Department, Justice, automatically represents the President of the United States when he, in his official capacity, is sued. But during Mr. Trump's tenure, it has supported Trump's legal team in lawsuits filed on behalf of Trump and against other parties, litigation that is intended to protect Trump's personal financial interests. The Justice Department said it was obligated to protect the independence of the office of the president, noting in one legal filing that Trump, as president, occupies a unique position in the constitutional scheme and that he should be exempt from subpoenas seeking his personal financial information. At least 10 department lawyers were named on legal briefs filed as Trump has tried to block institutions, including Deutsche Bank, from releasing his financial records. Another 10 department lawyers on top of that were listed on filings made in lawsuits as Trump had violated the Constitution's emoluments clause by taking money from foreign governments at his hotels and clubs. Justice Department lawyers have also been involved in cases in which the president sought to restrain former aides who had written books about him, including one by John Bolton. Robert Weissman, the president of Public Citizen, a nonprofit group that has tracked ethical issues during the Trump administration, and a million others, said the use of campaign and federal government funds to finance legal actions captured a dizzying array of themes his group has sought to highlight. The legal work, he said, is being used to defend violence at political rallies, chill the free speech of former aides, and fight allegations of unethical actions by Mr. Trump himself. And it is being paid for in large part by large individual donors who could seek help from Mr. Trump in dealing with government actions that affect their own interests at a time when the Justice Department has moved from simply defending the president to helping protect his personal finances, he said. It is an astounding nexus of corruption, and the legal system in the United States is the one that is supposed to be defending justice. And guess what? It's not. Now, there's a follow-up to that piece, or that I'd define as a follow-up, that comes from Shane Goldmacher and Maggie Haberman, everyone's favorite, followed by a couple of days, similarly titled, also of course in the New York Times, How Trump's billion-dollar campaign lost its cash advantage. 5 months ago, President Trump's re-election campaign had a huge financial edge over Biden's. The Times conducted an extensive review of how the Trump team spent lavishly to show how that advantage evaporated. So a larger blanket here, a larger spending umbrella looked at than just the legal fees. Legal fees, I don't know if it's a small part, but a part of a larger pattern of spending like there's no tomorrow that has left the campaign, I guess, I don't know if we would say bankrupt or impoverished, but certainly with a lot less cash on hand during a crucial period than anybody in the Trump campaign or Republican circles, I guess, anticipated. And remember, the whole premise of his candidacy was that he was such a savvy businessman and had so much money that there would never be a shortage of funds. And not only is there now a shortage of funds, we're now finding out that he not only spent his donors' money, but that he spent the donated money that went to the RNC and other Republican organizations that ordinarily would be going to support the reelection efforts of House and Senate members, which is now evaporated. It's now gone, been spent, stolen, and misappropriated by the Trump campaign, and, basically probably stolen and pocketed by Trump family members rather directly, maybe with a few pass-throughs in between. And, that's probably worrying the rest of the rank and file of his party. Now, this also another extraordinarily long piece. I don't know how much we'll be able to get through. It was going to lead, I was going to use that, if I had infinite time, to lead up to this Politico piece. Trump antagonizes GOP mega donor Adelson in heated phone call. This is actually an older piece going back to August 8th that maybe I'll just throw in here now, even though I was going to use it as a follow-up. But chronologically, it happened first. But I think this is an important part of the background. Alongside the rather unbelievable contention that Trump was considering making some sort of personal expenditure to salvage the election, which, is ridiculous to think about, but that was floating on Twitter this morning. I guess it becomes the last ditch PR effort, to let everybody know that, well, okay, we used up all the money, we stole all the money, and we couldn't get Adelson to replace the money, and we're not having any luck getting anybody else to do it either. A lot of the Republican mega donors are either otherwise engaged or unsure of the wisdom of bankrolling the thievery that's going on. And if Trump isn't getting enough of it in his pocket, if too many other people are stealing it along the way, they're not sure if they're going to get the favors that they think they're entitled to for donating that money, and they're backing off. So back in August, I guess, long story short here, he had a call with Edelman. I don't know what the premise of the call was, whether it was supposed to be about seeing if he could get more money out of Adelson. But Trump handled it in a typically Trump manner, and it ended up, as it says here, I'll read the first couple paragraphs. When President Donald Trump connected by phone last week, that would have been early August, late July, with Republican mega donor Sheldon Adelson, perhaps the only person in the party, or anywhere for that matter, who can cut a 9-figure check to aid his reelection. 9 figures. The phone call unexpectedly turned contentious, because everything Trump does turns contentious. But, this is supposed to be an ass-kissing call. The 87-year-old casino mogul had reached out to Trump to talk about the coronavirus relief bill and the economy. All his casinos are closed. We need help. But then Trump brought the conversation around to the campaign and confronted Adelson about why he wasn't doing more to bolster his reelection. According to 3 people with direct knowledge of the call, one of the people said it was apparent the president had no idea how much Adelson, who's donated tens of millions of dollars to pro-Trump efforts over the years, had helped him. Adelson chose not to come back at Trump. When word of the call circulated afterward, Republican Party officials grew alarmed that the president had antagonized one of his biggest benefactors at a precarious moment in his campaign. They rushed to smooth things over with him, but the damage may already have been done. Adelson's allies say it's unclear whether the episode will dissuade the Las Vegas mogul, long regarded as the financial linchpin for Trump's reelection, from helping the president down the home stretch. White House spokesman declined to comment. They're not supposed to, so that they finally had a good excuse on that one. The president needs the money. With less than, at that point, 3 months until the election, he is overwhelmed by a flood of liberal super PAC spending that his party has failed to match. Since this spring, outside groups supporting Joe Biden have outspent their pro-Trump counterparts nearly 3-1, an influx that's helped to erase the president's longstanding financial advantage. Now, Republican leaders are pleading to billionaires for help. Trump advisors are pining, there's actually, used the word pining, for new outside groups to form, and the White House is growing anxious to see what Adelson, who has pumped hundreds of millions of dollars into Republican super PACs over the past decade, will do. So that's pretty scary for them. Oh, let me just mention in this paragraph, it's important that word get out to donors that we need the super PACs and we need them to step up to the plate, said Club for Growth President David McIntosh, whose group is poised to launch a $5 million TV campaign next week. I don't know if they actually did it or not, which tells you something about how effective it was. Blah, blah, blah. We need money, etc. Anyway, David McIntosh, actually the original author, just thought I'd throw you this one way back, to original author of that legislative attack on nonprofit agencies that became known later on as the Istook Amendment, when Ernie Istook, who was a member of the Appropriations Committee, picked up the language that McIntosh had sought to introduce in authorizing committees and took it to the Appropriations Committee and tried to attach it to every bill. That was Ernie Istook's work, but the legislative language and the attack was dreamed up by David McIntosh. Just thought I would throw that little historical note in there now that he's president of Club for Growth. I don't know how long that's been the case. But anyway, let me then jump back to our more current piece, Shane Goldmacher, Maggie Haberman, expanding on Lipton's theme about how legal bills have eaten up a large chunk of the money that was supposed to pay for not only Trump's reelection, but holding the line in Congress and elsewhere for Republicans. So, money, I'll get back to, I just read the headline and that's it, right? Now, none of the body. Money was supposed to have been one of the great advantages of incumbency for President Trump, much as it was for President Barack Obama in 2012 and George W. Bush in 2004. After getting outspent in 2016, Mr. Trump filed for re-election on the day of his inauguration, earlier than any other modern president, betting that the head start would deliver him a decisive financial advantage this year. Bad planning. Again, where are my behavioral economists? Can tell me, what will Donald Trump do with a large pool of money raised so far ahead of the needs in time that he can perceive no disadvantage in tapping into it and stealing it early, because there's still plenty of time to extort lots more later on, and it doesn't seem like a particularly disciplined person. And basically, the best you could have done for preserving the donations would have been to have put it in escrow somewhere where he can't get to it. But, you know, there's no money that he thinks he can't get to. So it was probably best to leave it with the donors until you needed it. All right. Well, anyway, after getting outspent in 2016, Trump filed for re-election right away, hoping that getting started early would give him a decisive financial advantage. It seemed to have worked. Joe Biden was relatively broke when he emerged as the presumptive Democratic nominee this spring, and Trump and the Republican National Committee had a nearly $200 million cash advantage. 5 months later, much like his casinos, he lost all the money. 5 months later, Trump's financial supremacy has evaporated. Of the $1.1 billion his campaign and the party raised from the beginning of 2019 through July, more than $800 million has already been spent. I would have put that in scare quotes. Stolen is the answer. But there you go. It's been spent. Now, some people inside the campaign are forecasting what was once unthinkable, a cash crunch with less than 60 days until the election, according to Republican officials briefed on the matter. Brad Parscale, the former campaign manager, liked to call Mr. Trump's re-election war machine an unstoppable juggernaut. But interviews with more than a dozen current and former campaign aides and Trump allies and a review of thousands of items in federal campaign filings show that the president's campaign and the RNC developed some profligate habits as they burned through hundreds of millions of dollars. Since Bill Stepien replaced Mr. Parscale in July, the campaign has imposed a series of belt-tightening measures that have reshaped initiatives, including hiring practices, travel, and the advertising budget. Under Mr. Pascal, more than $350 million, almost half of the $800 million spent, went to fundraising operations, as no expense was spared in finding new donors online. The campaign assembled a big and well-paid staff and housed the team at a cavernous, well-appointed office in the Virginia suburbs. Outsized legal bills were treated as campaign costs, and more than $100 million was spent on a television advertising blitz before the party convention, the point when most of the electorate historically begins to pay close attention to the race. Amongst the splashiest and perhaps most questionable purchases was a pair of Super Bowl ads that the campaign reserved for $11 million, according to advertising analytics, more than it had spent on TV in some top battleground states. It was a vanity splurge that allowed Mr. Trump to match millionaire Michael Bloomberg's big buy for the big game. There was also a cascade of smaller choices that added up, and we'll get to some of that perhaps in discussion with Joan after this. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So there's plenty more to this New York Times story, and luckily Joan has read it, and I haven't yet, although I'm getting the sense of it from having skimmed through. But I think she has now joined us during the break, and after a short discussion of the weather and what's on fire in Idaho at the moment, she reminded me I think the real takeaway in terms of the waste of money on advertising in the Trump campaign, in addition to the Super Bowl ads being a vanity splurge, pardon me, as they put it there, because, he was going to be watching the Super Bowl. He wanted to see his own ads in the Super Bowl broadcast. That was a big thrill for him. But, I think everybody pretty much can, you don't have to be a campaign manager to figure out that $11 million is a bad deal on political advertising that most people will skip anyway. And they want to see funny Doritos ads, not campaign ads. But not only that, but there was another big vanity buy. And well, Joan's here. Why don't I could just have Joan tell you about it? That would be a lot more fun for me if we did that. Hi, Joan. How are you?
I am fine. Good morning.
All right.
I actually haven't read the story, just a lot of tweets and Marcos's front page story about it.
Just as good.
$800 million.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's a whole campaign.
Anyway, it reminded me the Super Bowl ad thing about how the campaign had decided it needed to run more than $400,000 in cable news ads in the DC market.
Right.
To make Trump feel better. Basically because he was having fits.
Yeah.
And he was in a bad mood. So they said, okay, let's go spend $500,000 on ads that only he will see to make him feel better.
Yeah.
That was back in June,
Incredible.
I think. Yeah, it was June that Daily Beast reported this.
I mean, yeah, other people, of course, will see him. But in D.C., D.C. votes like 93% Democratic in a presidential year. But even in the close-in suburbs, for the DC market, there's no point in advertising, certainly not at that point in time on there, but it was literally just because Trump does nothing but watch TV, and the only way to make it look like he was having an impact in the country would be if it was on the Gorilla channel that he was watching, that he's advertising and fighting for freedom or whatever the hell it is he thinks he does.
Well, and to the point, most of the money was spent at Fox.
Oh, yeah, okay. So that makes sense. I mean, he probably would have complained any other way And of course, that would be all he watches. So I suppose that was a good idea on their part. But they get to say he'll now call Fox and say, "Why aren't you giving me better coverage? I spent $400,000 in ads on your network," which to them is nothing, but in his mind, he'll think that gives him leverage over Fox. But yeah, they're just huge amounts of money wasted on ads that may or may not work to audiences that don't care about them except the one guy. It's at least we knew about
the audience of one.
Yeah.
Yep. It was all about making him feel
Right.
better about his campaign.
And normally that stuff is free. You just go on Fox News and give an interview and say great things about Trump or things that are designed to spark his interest, and that doesn't cost the campaign any money. This was like, I don't know. That is the biggest waste I can think of besides just the outright stealing of the money, which is probably where most of it went.
I think that's probably where most of it went. I like to see the little bit of sniping between Pascal and the family last night. Pascal coming back saying, "Hey, I didn't do anything that the Trump family didn't tell me I could." So let's just hope that heats up that little circular firing squad.
Yeah, that would be fantastic to see that happening. And I don't know I don't know if I could guess who's telling the truth in that one. I feel like
None
they
of them?
could. Yeah, that is not the whole truth anyway. That's the only answer I can think of that makes any sense. I do think he's right in that there's nobody more tight-fisted about letting other people steal their money from them without noticing than the Trumps. I mean, not that they're careful with their money. That's not what I mean. It's just they just don't want anybody else stealing any of it. And even when they're not stealing it, they accuse people of stealing with it. So it's hard to believe that they would have let hundreds of millions of dollars slip away without knowing about it. On the other hand, did they authorize Brad Parscale to, buy boats and Lamborghinis and whatnot?
Right.
Nah,
Right.
probably not. And as soon as
So
they
I
found
would
out, he got married.
expect, I don't know that I would think his days are numbered with the campaign. Wouldn't you?
Yeah, I guess so. I
Knowing
mean,
how they work? Even though it is now mid-September almost.
yeah. Well, so I guess by definition they're numbered. Soon it will be over.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I guess at some point, if Trump perceives that there's some sort of tough-looking thing that comes from firing him, I'm reshuffling the campaign. That play. Then I guess that's when he goes. But the fact that he couldn't bring himself to just say, "Get out of here, you're cut off." I don't know. I guess that means he must have seen
With
Trump
all
do
of
something.
the reporting about the Lamborghini and the boat and all of that was months ago, wasn't it?
Yeah. And I don't know.
I'm very confused these days.
Right. So I guess he saw Trump and some tape and maybe some pee somewhere, and I guess now you got to keep paying him. I'm not saying it's all
They
together.
do make some
place.
really interesting decisions, and like the thing having been played, I don't know how many times by the K-pop kids,
Yes.
and all of the teens out there doing things like saying, "Sign up
Right.
for our texting campaign and we'll send you yard signs." I mean, it's all anecdotal, but I've seen lots of people say, "So my kid did this and I have 90 Trump signs in my garage."
Yeah, that's another great story. I mean, besides the tickets, the signs, and that of course just leads us to the yard sign battle all over again. But yeah,
The things cost money to produce.
Right. And the Trump campaign willing to spend that money, but I can't believe it would never occur to them that, hey, if we just open it up to, if you put your email in here and then the number of signs that you want or whatever, or you can sign up any number of times and we'll match it with mailing a sign, like that they thought that was never going to result in them losing A, all the signs, and B, all the money on postage. I don't know. I guess they're just not very bright. And that has come up from time to time.
That has come up from time to time. Or they just, flush money down the toilet and that's fine.
Maybe. And I mean, it might be the people who print the signs for them are family, friends, and they just want to push cash out the door to them, and it doesn't really matter.
Now that's entirely likely.
Yeah, I mean, it can't be a strategic decision. The direction on signs has been the other way for 15 years now, and I mean, I'm surprised that the Trump campaign. Honestly, that's one thing I'm surprised that they didn't pick up, the opportunity to make people pay for their yard signs just as I can steal money this way trick, which, on the other hand, on the Democratic side, they say yard signs are expensive and they're a pain in the butt to distribute. It's a huge headache. I understand that for the campaigns, but people love them. So, for a $20 donation, we'll get one to you. The $3 it costs to print and mail it is offset. We get we build up our donor list, our mailing list, and we control for people asking for 900 of them for no reason.
Right.
And simple. People don't like it, but whatever, they do it. They're excited about getting a sign, or they feel like they need one. Fine. $20 is what they were going to donate anyway. Good.
They get a sign.
I can't believe
everybody's happy.
Yeah, Trump is not like you can get a gold club sign for $100 and a platinum club for $500. How could he not do that?
Which his people would have done.
Sure, personally signed.
They're that stupid.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're sinking their boats for him. That's much more costly.
Dunkirk. That's my favorite name for it.
I've seen, Dunkirk and Dumbkirk are two good
Dunkirk.
variants of that one. But it lends itself to the best. So people are losing boats. They're lighting boats on fire. I think that was an accident, not on purpose.
Or they were trying to prove that Antifa did it.
Right. I named you as the commander of the Antifa Navy in today's
saw that.
morning.
Thank you very much. I'm working on my soup can torpedoes in the garage as we speak.
Excellent. Any particular flavor you recommend for that, or is it just as long as it's in a
cream
can?
of mushroom, because really, what else are you going to do with it? I know people like to use it for white sauce, but people don't.
Okay. Well, that's a little cooking advice.
Sorry, we almost had a dog eruption there because somebody was on the sidewalk.
Oh, well, that's my pooping area. Get out of there. Warning.
No, it's just, that's my sidewalk.
Okay, right. Well, that belongs to me and no one's allowed on it. This is a small portion of the West not currently on fire. Your sidewalk.
My sidewalk. Actually,
okay.
Boise is not on fire.
Good.
We have the smoke from all of the fires all around us.
Externalities.
All around us. I guess Oregon is largely on fire as of yesterday. Most of the state yesterday was under a fire watch. And in fact, they were going to start talking about doing what they've been doing in California and turning off power to try to prevent, the wind causing fires by power lines blowing over, I guess was why they were talking about doing it. I don't know that they did, but I do know that a lot of fires sprung up in Oregon.
Okay.
We had this huge front come directly down from the north with crazy, crazy winds. Houses trees toppling over on houses. That's what I was trying to say. In my neighborhood, blocks away from me. Unfortunately, not the one tree I hate in front of my house. It could have blown over. I would have been fine with that, but it didn't. So
Save us some money removing it? All right.
Anyway, yes, the West is pretty much entirely on fire or being snowed on. That's
fire and ice.
Climate change
is
a hoax.
Well, that's, it makes sense, though, the idea of in a big windstorm. Now I see that it could make sense. Make sure there's not live power lines being toppled, but that didn't happen.
Because
that's
it's been very, very dry all summer. Super dry.
Right.
And, it's dangerous out there. I saw a map of Colorado yesterday, a Weather Service map, and sort of in quadrants.
Yeah.
3 of them were fire and 2 of them were snow.
They go together so well.
Yes.
So good for everyone loves the extremes. And I guess with the COVID pandemic now in like 6 month range or so. I'm thinking this must be the reason for all the gender reveal parties that are lighting everything on fire.
God.
Everybody's now expecting children in a couple of weeks and blowing things up, and so it doesn't really matter whether you turn off the power or not. Somebody's
going to go out. In Idaho, they go out and use exploding ammunition.
Yeah.
For target practice out in the desert.
Yeah.
That's the usual cause of fires out here.
Yeah. So, they need more sandy deserts and less scrub, I guess. But
yes.
So go shoot in Saudi Arabia.
They also
What's wrong
need
with you
not
guys?
to have expanding bullets to play with.
Oh.
Exploding, rather, bullets to... Anywho,
yes,
that's the weather report.
Yes.
Do you want to hear more about illegal campaign stuff?
No.
No.
more weather. Yes, absolutely. And I see that you're first on the list here, at least in reverse chronology. Illegal campaign finance that ropes in Louis DeJoy. Is that where you meant to go with this? Because that's a fine place to start.
Isn't that a fine place to start? Did he just not seem like an organized crime kind of guy when you first heard him speak?
Yeah, that's true. And I didn't know at the time that he was originally from New York, although that becomes clear. And his background in trucking in New York, it all starts to make sense.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, not to stereotype or anything, but
right.
Yeah. So it turns out, allegedly, we have to say allegedly because, the people who work for him are saying he did this, but it's not proven yet. 124 of his previous employees at a company called New Breed contributed over $1 million to Republican candidates from 2000 to 2014 when he was working his way up to become a big donor for the Republicans to become the guy.
Yeah.
And during that time, they donated just $700 to Democrats. So
both sides.
Out of his 124 employees were all Republicans and all gave lots of money and all magically received bonuses that matched the contributions they made to his fundraisers.
Plus taxes.
Plus taxes. That's
nice.
Called straw donating, and it's illegal.
Well, we should do something to stop it.
We should do something to stop it.
That'd be great.
So, there lots of former employees talked about this and said that, he leaned on them to donate. And he did pay them back, but he put a lot of pressure on people to donate this money.
Yes, so it would seem.
And the House is investigating it. The House is also investigating whether he lied to Congress when he said he did not do this thing. And technically, it might not have been a lie, but it depends on what they can prove he did after 2014. When the company was sold to XPO Logistics, where he remained a director.
Yeah.
Because the Post's investigation ends at 2014, and what he was asked about in the hearing was whether he did any of this kind of fundraising for the Trump campaign.
Yeah. Very specific question.
So that's where the lying to Congress might not have happened unless they can show that, yes, that practice did continue when he was at XPO.
Yeah, I would be, I guess I wouldn't be surprised to see that he might have tried it. I don't know how much control he exercised at XPO the way he did with, New Breed. But it was interesting to learn that yesterday, too. He had been billed to me, as reading the news briefly about his background as as a chief at XPO Logistics, which I asked about. My wife knows all about this sort of logistics and shipping for her own work, and said, "Oh yeah, XPO Logistics is a huge player." When we were trying to figure out where did this new postmaster general guy come from? Well, if he was at the top of XPO, they're legit. And now we find out, oh, yeah, he was barely there at all. His company was bought by XPO, and New Breed is nobody. So apparently I read in the articles yesterday that their chief contract with the Postal Service was folding mail bags, which, that's
seriously?
not actually delivering anything, but the
because
mail bags have to
they've
be
gotten
folded.
some very lucrative contracts since DeJoy showed up there at the post office.
Yeah.
They've made $14 million in
Wonderful.
Postal Service contracts since he took over.
XPO has?
Yeah.
Yeah. XPO was the legit player. But yeah, his company, their money from postal contracts way back when he was, when that still existed before it was bought up, was from, support services is probably the best thing you could say about it. They didn't deliver anything for anybody.
Well, the previous periods, 2019 and 2018, they were making like $4 million off of the Postal Service in the same time frame as this year post DeJoy, when they made $14 million.
It's nice.
So yeah, and he still has a financial stake in the company, at least $30 million and as much as $75 million. You know how with financial disclosures, you show the range that you're in, not the exact amount. So he may have as much as a $75 million stake still in XPO.
Let's see if we can work on narrowing those ranges.
It would help, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I understand the necessity for it because valuation can change wildly, etc. But still.
That's a huge range.
$1 to $1 billion. That's no help.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, he'll be on the hook, and we'll see whether. I mean, the perjury to Congress is, I guess, the least of his worries, and I'm less concerned about that than. Well, let's get to they'll have their investigation and figure out. Plenty of illegality without perjury.
Well, because all of it comes down to what were you doing for the Trump campaign, and were you doing it at the Postal Service, and have you been doing it to sabotage the Postal Service and the November election? That's what really matters, and that's what all of these questions were leading to. Yeah.
I would be curious to find out whether any of the reimbursements for the contributions were sent by mail. Just so, I mean, it would be fun to be able to say. So
that would be mail fraud.
Right, yeah. You can't be Postmaster General and a mail fraudster, can you? Now you can.
Yeah, in Trump world you can.
I guess that's true. So that'll be a new frontier in corruption. That's nice. When do those hearings begin?
Well, they sent out the subpoenas last week.
Okay, so they'll be ignored next week.
Yeah, and Maloney said the investigation's starting now. So you have to wonder, though, with the direction that Democrats were taking in the hearing, whether they didn't have some indication of this.
Yeah, I guess so.
Jim Cooper just popped up with, did you illegally reimburse executives' donations to Donald Trump in the hearing about Postal Service sabotage? So,
yeah, someone must have tipped him to that, and maybe one of the people who got interviewed for the article, or maybe they got interviewed for the article by first calling somebody and saying, hey, this happened in Tennessee, though. I don't know what the connection was. Maybe a former exec in their North Carolina operations who retired to Tennessee or something.
Something. It was a rather random thing for him to pop up with.
Yeah. And he's not
in this hearing
for doing
it. I didn't think about it much at the time, but anyway.
Nice.
They maybe know something.
Sure. Okay, fine. Jim Cooper, anything to help keep him in closed ranks and fighting the right enemy is good news.
And maybe if he becomes problem enough, Trump does fire him. And maybe some of the sabotage stops.
Maybe. Okay. Well, I'm sure he'll find somebody else to try to do it. But, the continuing saga of the rotating federal employees and campaign staff, hiring the best people, et cetera, et cetera. It's valuable at that point. All right. What else? Let's see. I'm running down your
let's
stories.
See. It is September 8th, which means we now have effectively 3 weeks before the government runs out of money.
Oh, yes, right. Thank you for reminding us. Fantastic. That'll get solved.
And not a whole lot has changed since we talked about this last. We did talk about it last Tuesday, didn't we?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Don't we always talk about?
I don't know if we definitely brought that up about the dates, but it's always a topic of our conversation because it's always happening.
Right. September used to be my favorite month.
Oh,
I used to just love September. Mitch McConnell ruins everything, Kagro.
Well, that's his job. But yeah, this is always a contentious point, and it's never been less simple to predict what was going to happen. I mean, this sort of brinkmanship is common, but you almost always have, certainly not two parties
kind of
working.
Resolution.
Yeah, somebody doesn't want the government to shut down, but now you have people who think it's fun.
Now you have Mark Meadows, the Freedom Caucus maniac, the head Freedom Caucus maniac, now being chief of staff. Mm-hmm. You've got Mitch McConnell, who loves a game of brinksmanship. Yeah. And you have Ted Cruz in there trying to influence Mitch McConnell. And you remember what happened with Ted Cruz and the Freedom Caucus maniacs way back when. And you've got Trump. All highly unstable things. Now, Mitch McConnell's not going to want a shutdown because it will totally freak out his already vulnerable Senate majority. But Mitch McConnell really hasn't shown to have a whole lot of power in any of this. He's not directing the White House. So we've got Pelosi and Mnuchin agreeing that no, we're not going to have a shutdown. We'll take care of that. We will do it separately from any COVID relief that's coming up. Whereas Mitch McConnell is thinking, well, let's fold them together and then I can get my way on liability protections. It's Mitch McConnell taking hostages again. He wants them together. Pelosi and Mnuchin say, no, they've got to be separated. So we're in no better position this Tuesday than we were last Tuesday on what's going to happen here. Okay. And we're probably not going to be any more clear on what's happening next Tuesday.
Oh dear,
because they just don't work that fast.
Yeah, and they've been largely gone on their break, and just as well, honestly. But all right, well, so just a few weeks left. Next week they'll likely waste in its entirety anyway.
Yes. This week they're doing almost only nominations, of course.
Oh well, sure. What else?
Judicial nominees, because it's Mitch McConnell.
Yeah.
But he is saying at some point they're going to have a vote on his skinny COVID relief bill. He's calling it targeted.
Okay.
And his liability reforms, as he calls them, are at the top of the list, letting schools and businesses off the hook for infecting people with coronavirus.
Yeah. Well, that'll be interesting. And the longer it takes for him to get that considered, the more obvious it becomes what he's trying to do as more schools and businesses close.
Right.
I don't know whether he thinks that builds support for him or lessens it. I assume
he's right now he's still negotiating with Republicans.
Oh.
He doesn't have 51 votes for it yet.
Okay.
And part of that problem is Ted Cruz insisting that something Betsy DeVos has been doing. Oh, yeah, subsidizing private school tuition.
Oh. And this upsets Cruz?
Cruz wants to get that into the COVID relief bill. If there's going to be another COVID relief bill, which he is opposed to because he's Ted Cruz, then it's got to have privatized schools getting public money.
Huh. Okay, well, that would seem to satisfy Cruz. How does Cruz feel about the whole soup thing lately? That I've been waiting to.
That's a very good question.
He loves soup, and it must upset him deeply to see it weaponized, or maybe he likes it. I don't know. I'm not sure where he stands.
These people are freaks.
They're very weird. Yeah. All right. Well, so, okay, now we know about what's coming up, and so there'll be a real rush coming back into D.C. We've got the Joy investigation heating up, the government facing another funding crisis, and McConnell holding hostages in order to benefit businesses who make their workers sick and want to be able to get away with it while cramming
and
through
Trump
still more
literally
deadly.
losing his mind.
Oh, well, yeah. That was always a given. That's true. I appreciate your reminding us of that. In case you've forgotten the madness that you've already rounded up, there's that other part. All right. So, like some exciting couple of weeks. So when we speak next week, right, your expectation is that nothing will have changed. Still.
Pretty much, yeah. We'll have maybe a few more horrible judges, but you know.
Okay. Well, yeah, we should probably start telling their stories because they'll be sitting on the bench for some time. I can't believe there's still vacancies left.
I know.
They're not creating new ones. That'll be our job next time.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll look forward to that. We'll look forward to hearing from you again next week, detailing how nothing has changed, but detailing how crazy that is. I suppose that's how we can build on it then. Thanks for coming by.
You're most welcome.
I
Talk to you
appreciate
next
it.
week.
See you then. Stay safe and not on fire. That's my advice.
I'll do my best.
From Daily Coos Radio
Take care.
on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Ah, yes, our time always too short, both with all of you at home and with Joan, but we get what we can on a Tuesday morning and rely, as always, on Justice Putnam to bring you the roundup of everything that we have missed as we've gone through the details on things, perhaps too closely, too granularly for some, but stay tuned. The West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is next.